Oh, it's because it's early. Okay. If you're watching this later, we have a Discord. There is a link to the Discord in the description of the video and pinned to the top of the live chat. It's just great. There was some good conversation in there today I was reading. Interesting people talking about interesting stuff. So if you're into the kind of thing that we're about to do or the other stuff that we do, if you've seen it, definitely recommend joining. If you join Discord, there's an events page that will show all of the live streams that we do. Bible study on Sunday, extra canonical types of texts on Thursday, game night Saturday when we have enough people, and Tuesday is a live topic discussion. This week is Gnosticism, which will be fantastic. It'll be very interesting to go through some of that stuff because I'm weird and I really like it. So I will be excited to talk about it, even if everybody is bored to death by it. I will have a good time, and that's important. Ghost, Mystic. It's so nice when you pop in. It really is. I definitely won't be bored. Yeah, it's good stuff, man. It's very good stuff. All right, we are in what, 48, 49, 48, 49, and 50. That's right, because we are finishing today. And then we're going to read the book of Job, which is one of my favorite canonical texts ever, because it's rich with theological shenanigans that make life very difficult. And I like that, because I like to be upset and unsatisfied. Hey, Ruth. Did I start the Discord thing? Yeah, I did. Okay. Yeah, I did. Bilbo's in there. Bilbo, I don't ever see you in there. I would recommend going to YouTube, though, because the voice alone is probably terrible. If I had to guess. Bilbo said Gnosticism, interesting. It is interesting. That'll be Tuesday, so hopefully you come hang out with us during that one. Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time. The quality is decent. The quality is decent, but you can't see anything. So the audio, I'm sure, is good, but you won't be able to see. So you'll lack the visual. The visual. Mystic said Job hits so hard. That is a good way to say it. Yes. A good way to say it. Job does, in fact, hit quite hard. Job is the one that will make you question everything you thought you knew about God. It will make you wonder what is actually going on in these parts. All right, since we have a lot to go through, I'm just going to start reading. If anyone wants to rudely interrupt me for any reason, please feel free. It is a happy Sunday. It was a weird Sunday, but a happy Sunday. Ghost said, Job, where Satan is an employee of God that later became misunderstood. Right. Right. That's also a good way to. That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. I like that. Yeah. It's just terrible. It's terrible if you want like a very cohesive theological perspective of the Old Testament God. Good old Yahweh. And then, to make it even better, Tuesday will completely destroy your brain in terms of Yahweh, which is just a good time. It's a great time. Genesis 48. Jacob blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. After this, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, your son Joseph has come to you. Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed, Israel being Jacob. And Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you. The promise that has been ever present throughout all of Genesis, throughout all of the main character men, that's all it is. It's the reiteration of the promise over and over and over and over and over again until your head spins. Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. This is interesting. There's a whole massive rabbit hole here, but they're his grandchildren, and this is adoption. This is a form of adoption, and there's argument, from what I understand, about what is actually happening. However, like a broader reach of the ancient Near Eastern world and the specific language used, it seems like a legitimate adoption, not like a, oh, hey, brother, and you're not brothers. Or New Testament, Paul talks about us being adopted into the family of Christ. It seems more legitimate from what I've gathered from other sources outside of Jewish texts. Go said adoption equals election. That's a part of the argument from what I understand. And I'm not super versed on this one, but I've read a bit over time, and it was one of the ones where I could never really find a clear answer, so I just kind of chalked it up to let it go. But yeah, election gets proposed from what I've seen. So it definitely could be. And in a sense, that is what happens, because Jacob then elects these 2 individuals to go on to do things. So maybe that's what they're talking about. I'm not sure. I just know that there's a lot of corroboration outside of the canon and also in other points of the Old Testament, tied in somewhat to like the Abrahamic covenant sequence, that it seems like a legitimate adoption. So it's just kind of interesting. There is a rabbit hole there if it's something you are interested in. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. So Manasseh and Ephraim shall be mine, Jacob says, as Reuben and Simeon were, because those were his kids. And then he goes on to say, and the children that you father after them will be yours. So in a sense, yeah, it is an election. It's just very interesting. The greater context of it is very interesting. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. Now, Logos had this: any children born to Joseph other than Ephraim or Manasseh, along with their descendants, still have a share in Israel as a nation. Jacob tells Joseph that they will belong to the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Verse 7 goes on, as for me, when I came from Padan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath. That is Bethlehem. From what I remember, this is also the first time we get any specifics about her death or where she was put down. That sounds kind of weird. Where she was buried. Verse 8. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, who are these? This is interesting. Who are these? If you remember the drama from earlier in Genesis, chapter 27, who are these? Could be due to Jacob's age. There's a lot of direct context that kind of makes that a viable way to interpret it and make it make sense. He has poor eyesight. That comes in verse 10. But I was reading this and it says, however, it is probably an allusion to Isaac's blessing of Jacob when he took his brother's birthright. Because in verse 9, Jacob uses the same word Isaac did. If you go to 27:4, which said, and prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. And it was during that whole shenanigan period with Isaac. It's an interesting kind of kickback to when that had happened. It goes on, the note that I have goes on to say, however, the overall wording of the blessing appears to be part of a customary legal procedure. So it's one of these things that, like, on its face is legitimate and makes sense, but there may be some undertones to it, drawing back from chapter 27. Go said the the who do we have here rhetorical question. Maybe. Yeah. I think it's a valid thing to point out for sure. Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." And he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face. And behold, God has let me see your offspring also." Then Joseph removed them from their knees, the kiddos, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, because Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel," differentiation, "the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." I wanted to read this, the angel. So we have the God and then the angel, very distinct separation seemingly. This is the Hebrew phrase used here, malaka, I don't know, y'all, likely refers to the angel of God or angel of Yahweh that has come up in other points of Genesis, and we've kind of talked about it a bit, whose identity is often blurred with Yahweh himself. And one distinct point of that, if you remember, and I think this is where we kind of talked about it for a while actually, was in Genesis 21 with Hagar. So Genesis 21:17 says, "And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, 'What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is.'" That is where we talked about it for a while. Kind of the what is the differentiation? What actually is the angel of God? What does that look like? Where else does it interact with Scripture? We had a decent conversation. This blurring of the identities is fitting with the parallel usage of Ha Elohim in Hebrew, which may be literally rendered as the God. The God. In verse 11, and in verse 11, and in 48:15, which was another point where it came up. 48:15 said, "And he blessed Joseph and said, 'The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all the life long to this day.'" God had divine encounters several times in his life, and at several of these times, it seemed that God appeared to him in bodily form, which we also talked about. The angel of God has also appeared to Jacob. 31:11 said, "Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, 'Jacob,' and I said, 'Here I am.'" So there's been a number of points in just this text where you have this very clear and concise, in my opinion, separation between the God as it's reflected, or the angel of God. Angel of Yahweh versus Yahweh himself. It's an interesting complex of sorts. Go said the message, the deliverer of that message. Say more. Just angel. Is this just related to angel, like the term being used? I listened to something really odd the other day about angels, and I need to post that in Discord. Mikkel, what's going on, friend? There you are.
I know we got to burn through it tonight, but I guess I'll say a little bit about what I wrote.
Yeah, please.
So Elohim would be like a disembodied concept, idea, spirit, algorithm, something that's not physical, and there would have to be a physical component that delivers that. So it's like an idea in the mind versus someone who is embodying that idea. and telling someone about it, or showing it to someone, kind of like here and now in the physical realm. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
why I said messenger, messenger, message.
Okay. No, that makes
If that
sense.
makes sense.
Yeah, that
Okay.
makes no, it makes total sense. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it.
Because it's like Elohim, Elohim, Malak.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. That makes perfect sense.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to explain it, actually. Okay, cool. Thank you. Let me see real quick. Okay, right on. So 17. Yeah, 17. So this is right before that is Jacob blessing Joseph. And then he expresses all of that. The division between seemingly God and the angel of God. I think the way Ghost just explained it is a really great way to look at it. It's a simple way to kind of explain something that is otherwise seemingly kind of complicated. Just because I think of the way they write it, to be honest. 17 starts, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, my father. Since this one is firstborn, put your right hand on his head." But his father refused. Jacob refused. "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." Continuing further the original promise in Genesis 20 says, "So he blessed them that day, saying, by you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, the mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow." Few things there. He put Ephraim before Manasseh. Obviously weird, due to just normal custom and what had been relatively consistent to this point in Genesis, and what we know remains relatively consistent throughout the majority of all of ancient history. This kind of flips it. Ephraim would become the more noteworthy of the two tribes, eventually becoming synonymous essentially with the northern kingdom of Israel. And then it's got Isaiah 7:17 and then Hosea 5:12, where some of this comes to fruition, and we have Ephraim show back up, and we see kind of the culmination of the greatness. And it said, "I'm about to die." Jacob said, "I'm about to die. God will be with you." Logos has, the Hebrew text here uses a plural form, indicating that Jacob's blessing refers to the whole nation of Israel, not just to Joseph. Just interesting, and the only reason I pointed it out is because in English, it's hard to get that contextually. It's very difficult to pull that contextually. So just for specific,
Joe,
yes.
in any of your studies, have you found like why sometimes the younger is favored over the older?
Nothing that's consistent, but I've never dedicated serious time to that. No, but not off the top of my head. No. Have
I
you?
mean, I haven't either, but just now I was just kind of like, I don't know if this is right or true, but it seems like the uh the verses that talk about the remote generation, or the people in the end that will have the truth over, say, the people that are more primitive, on a timeline, it's like like we're the remote generation is the younger generation, because we haven't been around long enough yet. We
Mm.
are that we know more. I don't know. It's just popped in my head.
No, that's
I
interesting
don't even
though.
know if I explained that right.
No, you explained it well enough. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I have to think about it. But I mean,
Yeah, same.
the original question is a good question too, because I don't recall ever really thinking that much into it. I think
Because there has to be some reason they're bucking the trend.
there has to be, yeah. So you've got Cain and Abel, Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau. Then here, well, no, then Joseph over his brothers, Ephraim over Manasseh. Let me try to grab a few of these. I've never really thought about this that deeply, and actually, like now, there's a very obvious trend.
Yeah, it seems to be the younger generation or the latter generation seems to have favor over the former. I
Yeah,
guess.
and
Is
then
it some type of like meta narrative going on?
I don't. I'm really thinking about it now though, because then you have First Samuel. The same thing happens with David, and First Kings. The same thing happens with Solomon. I don't know, but this is a great question. This is a very thought-provoking question. I've never really thought about it, but it's totally a trend. From a number of times in Genesis, 4 times, 5 times in Genesis, and then at least just like on a rudimentary search to try to grab it, First Samuel and then First Kings. So I'm gonna leave this up, and I'm gonna look more later. I think that's a really good question, though. Is like, what is the? I'd be curious to see what like biblical scholars say about that, because they definitely have theories out there. I've just never looked, or never heard them, or never remembered. It's a great question. Yeah,
Yeah, same.
the theories are
I'll look
probably,
into it.
yeah, for sure. They're probably really interesting. That's a great question. Great point. And the majority are out of Genesis. Genesis 4, 17, 25, 37, and 48. And then First Samuel and First Kings. It's a great question. I definitely want to look more into that. All right. God be with you. Contextually, blah, blah, blah. All right. And then 22 was, moreover, I have given to you rather than to your brothers one mountain slope. There seems to be like a lot of disagreement about translation here. So the Hebrew term, I'll put in the chat. Shechem, that term is identical to the Hebrew name of the location. I've always heard it Shechem, but Shechem, maybe. I'm not sure. Ghost, if you know, then interrupt me. Jacob purchased
Is that the
land.
word for shaking, or am I thinking of something else?
I don't think so, but
Maybe that's Yiddish.
I'm not totally confident though. I know like we had the big story out of 33 in Genesis. I think I was pronouncing it Shechem because that's what I've always heard. But that means nothing because I'm awful with it. So if anybody knows the pronunciation, let me know. But I assume Shechem or Shekim, maybe.
It looks like Shechem.
Right? Okay. All right. Either way, I think that's what I was saying before when we were at 33. But it was Jacob purchased land at Shechem, and Joseph later is buried there in Joshua 24. But it's a place that gets brought up a number of times. So depending on English translation, I've seen it a lot of different ways. The ESV has mountain slope. Others have like slope of the land. But the Hebrew term is the same as what is used for Shechem as a location, which is just kind of interesting. It's a confusing verse when you try to dig into it a bit. Mikhail said maybe remote or later generations are supposed to benefit from all the knowledge gained from previous generations. Mistaken beliefs and misconceptions about God and his plan with humanity. I think something like that. Yeah. I think there has to be a very like robust reason for that. And I have just never thought about it. Remote or later generations are supposed to benefit from the knowledge. It could very well be, man. I'm super curious to read now and see what kind of the theories are. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's something like that. I could see that making sense. I think it's a valid thought. Yeah. I think if nothing else, it's probably a good foundation. I'm super curious though. I'm excited to look at that later. Jacob blesses his sons. 49. Then Jacob called his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. This is it's kind of a poetic blessing. From what I looked at, the way the way it appears in original manuscripts is it's different. It's pretty, like a lot of other things do when they kind of have a poetic vibe to them. I'm not a super adequate Hebrew scholar in any remote possibility of describing me like that, but you can kind of see it in the text. It's it's there. It's tangible to some degree. Go said, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Makes sense at face value, but need to look into it. Yeah, I think it's a valid basis, if nothing else, for sure. But Jacob's blessing and curses, because it's a mixture of both, and parts of it are actually kind of brutal, are about what is to come through the Old Testament. It's the full fruition of what is to come with the 12 tribes. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and my first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power, unstable as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. You went up to my couch. Jacob, this is from Logos. Jacob demotes Reuben for his immorality. While sexual immorality in certain contexts may not have merited such a demotion, like in other stories or other contexts, as Judah is not demoted for his actions with Tamar in 38. But Reuben's actions had dishonored his father and were an attempt to usurp his father's leadership of the tribe. And that was in chapter 35. So this is sweet and then brutal. Simeon and Levi, the brothers, weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen, which is brutal. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This was super interesting. So, weapons of violence. Talking about what happened in, to bring it up again, Shechem in 34, when they decimated because of what happened with their girl, their family. So they're getting blasted for that. And then, let my soul come not into their counsel. Jacob is formally disassociating himself from what they did and from them. Their willfulness, they hamstrung oxen. This would be taking out the oxen so that they could not work anymore. So hamstrung is, I'm not sure if that's literally how it was done. If you think about I don't want to be gruesome, but making parts of an animal's legs not work so that they can't fulfill their tasks. They can't work the fields. They can't carry water. They can't do the stuff they need to do. The implication here is that by Simeon and Levi doing that, where they had done it in Shechem, they left the women alive, but the women had no means to survive. So by killing the men, by hamstringing the oxen, the women aren't going to make it. So they let these women live, but their fate is to die because they don't have the means to continue on surviving. So it's just brutal. And the added context is interesting, if nothing else. David, good evening, family. Sorry I'm late. Please forgive me. I love each one of you. David, it's good to have you. Better late than never, my man. Ghost here still thinking about Patrick. I didn't see that earlier. That's funny. Verse 8. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. There's quite a bit there. Logos. For Judah is a lion's cub. It says, in an Old Testament metaphor for strength and cunning, the epithet Lion of Judah from Revelation 5:5 derives from this blessing, which is interesting because I didn't know because I don't like reading Revelation, but that's interesting and it makes sense. Since Micah 5:2 associated Judah with the coming of the ruler of Israel, the Lion of Judah became a messianic motif as well, which is interesting. I didn't know that. It's interesting stuff. Then in 10, it said, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. I found this really interesting. It says, translation of this verse, and therefore the meaning, varies considerably among English versions due to differences in manuscript readings, such as the division of the consonants into words. So this is an interesting one if you wanted to do like a language study, to pull 10, specifically the second line of 10 in an English translation, because it seems very unreliable and like they weren't quite sure what to do with it. Go say the Yiddish word I was thinking of is shekelin, meaning to shake. It's what they do in front of the Wailing Wall outside Jerusalem. No relation to Shechem. Oh, interesting. That sounds Yiddish, though. I'm telling God on you for being like... all right, then it goes on 11. Yada, yada, yada. He has washed his garments in wine. This is also interesting. The image is meant to be comical. Like, that's the intention. Because only well-to-do people, only the high-status people would have that much alcohol, that much wine, that they could basically do whatever they wanted with it. So it's silly. He washed his garments in wine. Goes on to kind of push that same narrative, that same concept with his eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. These are like rich people stuff. He's going to be very high status. He's going to do very well. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Was this one? Let me see. Yeah, okay. So this is out of Logos too. This was interesting. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. Logos said it is difficult to know why Zebulun is connected to the sea in this verse, since none of the territory of Zebulun touched the Mediterranean. This could mean that the reference to the sea here is to the Sea of Galilee, which the tribe was actually near. And then the mention of Sidon, Zebulun's territory did not border the Phoenicia city Sidon. However, here Sidon may refer to the nation of Phoenicia as a whole, which is just like geographically kind of interesting. As Zebulun's territories, their boundaries were adjacent to that area. It's just interesting. It's another thing like I'd never really thought about until I did. And then looking at a map, it's kind of odd. But if it's Galilee, then maybe it makes a bit more sense. But for the Mediterranean, it makes no sense, really. So it's like very questionable. Like, what are they talking about? You never know. Oh God, what do you never know? Jesus. Where are we at? 14? Issachar, I'm not sure about that pronunciation. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heel so that its riders fall backwards. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Dan shall be a serpent. The Hebrew word, I'll put in the chat. Nachash, anybody wants to look it up. I'll put it on the screen for a minute. That word is the same term used in chapter 3 for the primeval enemy of Adam and Eve. This means that Jacob is he's recharacterizing what Dan's name means. He will act as an accuser, not one who delivers proper judgment or justice. This is reflected in the later reputation of the tribe of Dan, which is also just interesting. It comes kind of full circle. In Genesis 36, Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. This is that Dan. Ghost got the word there. So accuser, divine, clever, shining, or burning one. 19. Raiders shall raid God, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Asher, there's also this. So the Hebrew expression used here probably refers to a reputation for fine food. However, it could be unflattering. In Judges 1:32, the tribe of Asher is living among enemies of Canaanites, indicating that they could be providing fine food for enemy people groups. Very interesting. Judges 1:32 says, so the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. So Asher's food shall be rich here. This is all prophetic in a sense, if not directly. Asher's food shall be rich. If it's a positive interpretation, if it's meant to be positive, then it kind of indicts them later in Judges for doing something they shouldn't have, which would be providing not just food, but fine food, rich food for enemy people. Interesting stuff. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Actually, here, pause real quick. So everything underlined in red. English translations of this verse vary considerably, since some of the words are homographs, words that are spelled like other words but have different meanings. This allows for the substantially different interpretations of the Hebrew text. While the first part of the verse seems to refer to flourishing, it is unclear whether Jacob's words to Naphtali are ultimately positive or negative. So basically, this entire section, underlined in red, there is a difficulty in actually expressing whether negative things are being said or whether positive things are being said, which it's not the only time this exists. It'll pop up a good bit in specifically the Old Testament. From what I understand, Hebrew in some cases is harder to understand intention than Greek is. A lot of the Koine Greek is much closer to things that we're used to. Still not super easy, but definitely closer. And Hebrew is rougher in certain cases. This is one of those cases. It seems rather cryptic in a sense. So interpretation is difficult. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attack him, shot at him, and harass him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. The mighty one of Jacob. 4 times this pops up in all of the Old Testament. Isaiah 49, Isaiah 60, Psalm 132, and then Isaiah 1:24. That's it. So this is one of 4. Yet his bow remained unmoved because Joseph did not go after those who wronged him. Joseph did not go after his brothers. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. And then it's got in parentheses there, or in brackets. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb, the blessing of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph, and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Benjamin, in ending, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at the evening dividing the spoil. It's given the portrayal of young Benjamin in the Joseph story back in 43. This description is odd, hard to predict, because it doesn't seem to be cohesive with what we had read prior. However, it fits later. So in Judges 20:15 to 25, we get a little bit of Benjamin action, and it becomes brutal. And so this again is like an indicator that this is prophetic work. And then Jacob's death and burial. Also, the word for a regular old serpent. Is it really? I didn't know that. The eeriest thing I ever saw, and I've seen some scary things, was an animal sacrificial hut in a Latin American jungle behind a church. Good God, man. Mikkel behind a Pentecostal church. Is the mighty one of Jacob referring to Gabriel? I don't think so. I don't think so. But I'm definitely not going to say no. I'm not sure. I've never gotten that, but that means absolutely nothing. If you end up looking into it and find anything, let me know. Here, I'll give you the rest of it there. The title is Avir Yaakov. Yeah. South American Catholicism is pretty wild. Super wild. How they... No, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. All right, that's that. Jacob's death and burial. Verse 28 out of chapter 49. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them to say to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron, the Hittite. A phrase that occurs only in the Pentateuch is, I am to be gathered to my people. Odd, but valid note. Only in the Pentateuch. Verse 30. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, and the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite, to possess as a burying place. This came up a number of times throughout Genesis, this place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, the field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittite. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. And that's that term again, or phrase again. Chapter 50. I'm super late. Sorry, my boss wanted to chat with me. She's here at the house. I work at what? Sounds like an interesting situation, Graves. But I think you just got cut off before you could finish. Chapter 50. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for it, for that is how many are required for embalming, and the Egyptians wept for him 7 days. Other places in the Old Testament, Numbers 20, Deuteronomy 34, there's an indication that the normal period was 30 days. Here we get 40 days. Probably because the period includes the embalming process, which doesn't always get brought up in other points of the Old Testament. Probably. Maybe more, maybe not. Not that it really matters. And then the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Verse 4. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father had made me swear, saying, I am about to die in my tomb, that I hewed out for myself in the land of Canaan. There shall you bury me. There's kind of a lot going on there. So the household of Pharaoh. Joseph does not directly address Pharaoh, obviously, because he's saying, please tell Pharaoh. His contact with his dead father probably made him unclean from Egyptian cultural standards, which would mean he could not go to Pharaoh as he otherwise would have been able to, as he otherwise was, because that was the relationship they had. And then in 5, it said that I hewed out. The Hebrew word there, kara, conveys or can convey the idea of preparing a burial place in advance without digging being necessarily involved. And we assume that because of 2 Corinthians 16, the same word, and then similar context, and 1 Kings 15:24, where same term, similar context. Verse 6, and Pharaoh answered, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Pharaoh is doing what Pharaoh has done with Joseph the entire time, and is being very gracious, and is being very respectful, and is basically has basically elevated Joseph to like the status of a high status Egyptian. That's the treatment he's got for this entire time, since the very, very early parts of the Egypt sections. And so this is just a continuation of it. He wants Joseph to keep his promise, his oath, because they were important, with his father, which is cool. It's good stuff. 7, so Joseph went up to bury his father. With him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. That is incredible. Just again, as like this is stuff we just read through. That is wild. The imagery of how incredibly high status Joseph, who is not an Egyptian, had made it in Egyptian culture, who are very culturally at the time, at least for sure, very culturally isolated and very culturally proud. It's a very, very incredible thing. It's a wild story. All the elders of the household, the elders of the land, that is wild. As well as the household of Joseph, his brothers and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen. Again, that is wild. This is all for Jacob. It's all for Israel. That's incredible. Like that's a picture, that's something to picture, and it should blow you away. And if it doesn't, you should look into like the Egyptian culture at the time. But like picturing this is an incredible thing. The number of people that were probably there, the span of land that this probably took up to have this for Joseph's brother, it had to be incredible. To need chariots and horsemen is wild. That shouldn't be necessary if this was a small, cute little service, some little like nice little funeral. Like this was an event. This was an event. Mikkel said, especially paying homage to a tribe of shepherds. Right, great point. Yeah, I think we talked about that last week, right? Yeah, great point. All the more incredible. Just a truly wild picture. It was a very great company, it says. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and grievous lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. I didn't know this, so this is interesting. Verse 10, when they came to the threshing floor of Atad, so the site is not mentioned elsewhere in the Old Testament and has not been identified with certainty at all. Its significance also is unknown. So what's interesting about that to me is that it's not often, but it definitely happens, but it's not often where the authors of these canonized texts will put something in specific that isn't significant. And it definitely happens, because it's already happened in Genesis a few times, where we've kind of talked about how this would have probably been apparent to the people then, because that we see that over and over again. Things that were obvious to the who would have been the known audience of the author, but it's just totally over our head. We have no idea what they're talking about. Everything's been changed. Culture has changed. There's just no clue. It's just lost on us. This seems to be, from what I've gathered, one of those things. This location is just, nobody has any idea. And there are a number of them in the Old Testament where we just have no idea. And so people guess. But this is one where it's good luck. Verse 11. When the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians." Therefore the place was named Abel Mizraim. I don't know. It is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite, to possess as a burying place. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone up with him to bury his father, which was a lot of people. That location in yellow, Abel Mizraim, it's the same as the other one. So an alternate name being used for the threshing floor of Atad. But this term means mourning of Egypt or meadow of Egypt, which is rough because those are two different things. And contextually, it could be either. So we don't really get a lot from it. Okay. We're in good shape. I'm gonna breeze through the rest here. God's good purpose. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Dad said this before you died, we swear. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you." It sounds so fake too. Like, dad dies. Brothers are afraid Joseph's going to retaliate. So they're like, "You weren't around, Joseph, but I swear, right before dad died, he said that you should forgive us." It just sounds like comical. "And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for I am in the place of God. For am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people shall be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. The death of Joseph. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, which is probably BS for numbers reasons. So it's unlikely. It's possible, but it's unlikely. But in Egyptian culture, 110 years was the ideal lifespan. So it was probably just written that way because that would make sense. "And Joseph saw Ephraim's children of the third generation. The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up to this land bring you up out of this land to the land." This is a projection to Exodus that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Joseph. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died, being, again, reiteration, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt, which is also culturally an Egyptian thing and not an Israeli thing. It was not a Hebrew thing. So the 110 years reiterated at the ending at 110 years, and then he was embalmed and put in a coffin in Egypt. The coffin is very specific to like Egyptian culture, and the 110 is also very specific to Egyptian culture. So it's unlikely that that is literal. It's likely that that is a part of the story. Ghost said, meadows and morning are both empty. Yeah, I suppose so. Some of the stuff you bring up, man, I don't ever think about. And then I do. And it's a valid connection. It's an interesting connection. Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. That whole thing, this is the type of stuff I complain about all the time. So sorry, but it just really bothers me. This stuff that where it seems like unless a new archaeological discovery happens, the likes of what happened in mid 1900s, like these are things we will just never know. We just get to sit in our uncomfortability and play games of guessing. One thing that is really cool that's happening, and I think I posted this in Discord last week or something, but data scientists are now coming together and creating these, call it a database, but it's not really, but like a textual database of sorts, these XML files that are categorizing the data from ancient scriptures in such a way that scholars are able to make connections now that we've never been able to make before, really. These scholars have had to do like everything by hand. And what takes the machine maybe a couple hours to complete? I mean, we're talking possibly years of a scholar's life, manually going through and trying to, like Go said, making connections. I think it's possible outside of archaeological finds. I think it's possible. And we're seeing some of it with like the early Christian church that I'm super deep into right now, where connections are being made that just had not, because we didn't have like the scholarly capacity for great men to be able to do it. And I'm way too dumb to even pretend like I could ever do it. So I rely on those great men, but there's just not enough of them. So it's like super frustrating. But now with the data science approach, I think we will uncover things. And I think we will learn new things outside of archaeological finds that we just otherwise would never have. And I'm super excited about it. And I'm nerding out really hard on these things currently because the information is really interesting. Go said they loved their metaphorical associations. Yeah, they really did, though. It also means guessing. Interesting. The latter or younger generation increases the knowledge. I mean, it's kind of true, though, right? I think.
Yeah. So some people use the word Nakash to mean diviner, and some people use the word Nakash to mean guessing, because it was like it kind of means the same thing, but you're looking at it through kind of opposite lenses.
Yeah. Yeah, I
It's
guess.
like we would say, a psychic, they're really just using like mentalism.
Yeah, no, fair. Huh.
It's like trickery,
Yeah, no, for sure.
So depending on who you asked back then what Nakash meant, you'd get, someone who can see the future or someone who's guessing, depending on the observer.
Yeah, it's all perspective. Okay, interesting, yeah. Huh.
Stuff to chew on.
Yeah, it is, man. It really is. And I'm gonna go right into what we were talking about earlier. I'm reeling from that a little bit. I'm curious. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But I didn't want to take up too much time because I know we're trying to get through it.
No, you're good. We're right on time. That'd be something interesting to go into deeper. So I think I'm gonna add it to Tuesday too. That's a full hour conversation for sure. From like
What's that?
From looking at the text where we see the second come or have more. What's the way to say it? Where the younger generation is kind of leading the way.
Mm-hmm.
that, and then the theories about it, because I assume it's not cohesive. I'd be surprised if it was cohesive, like the scholarship angle to it. I could see there being conversation there. I'll try to refine like what the actual question is or the topic title or whatever. But I think there's a lot there to be able to talk about textually and otherwise.
I've about 5 years ago when I was kind of getting a lot of these epiphanies for the first time. Um, I had this thought where I don't know if I brought this up on the pod before, but where heaven is like synonymous with the future. And if you go back and just read through scripture with that kind of idea in mind, it can have it can make things make more sense, I think. Because it's like I don't know how to like go into it fully right now at the end of the podcast, but
Oh.
it's an idea we'll put a pin in.
So contextually or literally, like replacing the word or replacing the concept every time the concept comes up.
So like if you ever read the word heaven, think in terms of some type of information that comes from the future, like back through time. That's kind of the way I think of it.
Okay.
But I
Okay.
don't know if it's true because also I think of heaven as the sort of software that is underneath everything else we experience.
Yeah, right.
So I
That's
don't know.
interesting. Yeah, I want to think about that too. I
But just
can.
like, if you're ever reading or studying anything and the word heaven comes up, like just entertain that thought in your head. Like, is this talking about the future?
Yeah, there's a handful of things popping in my head right away. Okay. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that. That's really interesting too. That's just something that came to you that you just thought about.
Yeah, like a while ago.
Okay.
And it's not like I was thinking about that, but it just popped in my head spontaneously. And I don't know where it came from or why. But then I couldn't forget that I had that thought and I just kept thinking of it. So it's weird.
It is weird, but it also like, yeah, I can see. It works on like the few things that popped in my head immediately. I could see why it works, but
Yeah, I was reading something completely unrelated. Um, and then I don't know why it made me think that, but it made me think that.
it's really interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna test it. I'm gonna go through and test it. I'm curious, but the few things that popped for me immediately, like it works. It's cohesive. That's really interesting. Huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, anybody have anything else? We'll trickle out, but no, not Tuesday. Next Sunday, we're gonna read Job or start Job. Job's it requires an introduction, so we'll do like a brief but thorough introduction on Job. Some of the things to, like, keep an eye out and be cognizant of before reading it, because Job really, like, aside from my joking in the beginning, it's a really complicated text. It does not read clean. It's theologically rich. It's theologically confusing as all hell, unless you have a very strict bias that you're very much stuck to. Then maybe it's easy. But if you're open minded, like I assume most of us are, it's very tough theologically to find a cohesive nature throughout the text. So we'll do that, and then maybe talk about it for a few minutes, and then go into it. Job will be very interesting to go through together. Well, it's one of my, if not favorite text, at least from the Old Testament for sure. It's just very deep. It's very deep. It's very complex, but it's wildly interesting. The narrative of it is just so interesting. The theological implications of it is so interesting, and I think so much so that most of Christianity has just kind of like put it to the side because they don't want to deal with it, because it indicts God in so much, and so they either have to do gymnastics to justify it, or they just kind of ignore it. That's what I've seen. But wrestling with it is really interesting, and it's a really good read. So that'll start Sunday. Tuesday we're doing Gnosticism, like Gnosticism 101. it's really information deep. I've like rewritten it a number of times, and tried to like break it up into bite-sized chunks. But just like fair warning, it's thick, it's hard. But I think I've got it to a point where it's understandable, because it's very hard. It's a very broad term that talks about too many things or refers to too many things. And so I really try to drag us into the very core of what Gnosticism actually is, and not what Gnosticism has become, because they're two entirely different things. Tampa said, I hated Job until I understood it. Now I love that book so much. Girl, if you understand Job, you are better than me. I understand enough, I feel like. But good God, that book. Talking about playing video games. Oh, Grey Vast. Okay. Lucio, you know, it was great reading an examination of the text when an hour passes in the blink of an eye. Were you here the whole time? You were just quietly observing? PS3 emulator. What do you run that on PC? Ghost said the hardest part about Job is deprogramming modern understanding. That is so true. So true. The hardest part about Job is not being biased. So I will do my best to not put my opinion out, and I'll do my best to completely destroy anything any of you say. Because it really is, it's just how boring to go into a book like Job and be like, this is what I believe about it. No matter what happens while we read it, that's what I believe. Like, come in blank, see what happens. I never thought about that, but you're right. It's totally true. It's totally true. The hardest part about a book like Job, and there's others, but like Job for sure, is being stuck in what you already think before going in. Every time, I swear to God, every time I've gone through Job with groups or individuals, all of which have always been smarter than me, every time I've reshaped like a lot of what I think about the text. So I would just be open to that. I don't think I will ever get to a place where like I firmly feel like there's no possible way my interpretation and understanding of Job changes. I don't think I will ever reach that. And I think I've preached, like when I was in church, I think I've preached on Job more than anything else ever. And I still, every time, like something shifts. But I'm very open to it. Yeah, next week will be good. And then Book of Giants, Enoch, continuing. And then we got to decide what to do after that. So we'll do a poll for that too. Whether something like Apocryphal or Gnostic or Sumerian or what, the Enuma Elish, something like that. Either way, good stuff. Good stuff. Please like this great discussion. You're the man. You and Kat. I'm glad I have you guys. Yeah, do the YouTube stuff. I'm going to go here in just a second. And then if you have 2 seconds, leave comments on the video. Do the algorithm stuff so we get new people running around here. Perfect. So Tuesday, Gnosticism, 7 p.m. Thursday, Enoch, Book of Giants. Sunday, Book of Job, introduction, and then the first few chapters because they're pretty short. So we'll probably get through a good amount. Anything else? Burning desires, last thoughts, whatever. And then Exodus is next. If you're watching this later, we have brutal.
I said everyone have a good night.
Yeah, you guys too. Love you guys. Have a good start to the week. Later. Night, guys. There was some good conversation in there today. I was reading. Interesting people talking about